that you are not just your genes and your environment, that scientifically, happiness can be a choice, but it's a choice that we can influence through our organizations. And when we do so, it becomes the greatest competitive advantage in the modern economy. This is my third time out speaking at Google. One of the times I came here was with Ming Tan to do a Google talk, and while I was talking to him, I started noticing all these comparisons between what we saw at Google and what I was seeing during my 12 years at Harvard. For example, when I talk to my friends from Waco, Texas, where I grew up, about going off to Harvard, they say, why would you study happiness there? They seem to have everything: opportunities, resources, wealth, successes. And when I was at Google, I was talking to people, and I asked them if they walked around in a constant state of ecstasy. And one of the women in the accounting department said, with sheepishly, that she actually felt very frustrated sometimes on Fridays because she would see the line for the free sushi and it was way too long. How is she expected to be productive when the line is that long, I ask you? But what I started realizing was it wasn't about the external world that causes people to become happier. And that's not what causes Google to be so successful, as Laszlo was mentioning earlier. What I want to talk about is what I was seeing at Harvard. One of the very first studies I did was the study of 1,600 Harvard students. I was looking to see, can you predict in a population that's very intelligent, very successful, very creative, who will rise to the top in terms of levels of happiness and success while they're there? I looked at everything. We asked their familial income, their SAT scores. We looked at their GPA. We looked at the number of clubs that they're involved in. We found out the number of romantic relationships, which we found at Harvard was on average less than one per Harvard student, which is why many people come out to Stanford. And we found it was 0.5 sexual partners per Harvard student, which I only mentioned because I still have no idea what that statistic even means. We were always taught to round up, but 0.5 sexual partners was the equivalent of second base, and it was useless information to us. But imagine a student who, ever since they were 1 year old, was placed into a crib, wearing a onesie that you can buy at the bookstore that says "Bound for Harvard," and maybe a cute little Yale hat in case something terrible happened. And ever since they were in pre-K school, which they got into 4 years before they were conceived, they were the top 1% of their class. Junior high, high school, standardized test, top 1%. They walk into Harvard and they have a terrible realization, one that many people when they come to Google have as well. They suddenly realize that 50% of them are now below average. To put it more poignantly, when I talk to these students, I said, it seems based upon my research that 99% of you will not graduate in the top 1%, which they don't find that funny either. But the reason that's interesting is they've decided to pin their levels of happiness on a future success which is related to something small, like grades, which if you know the statistics on grades, I can roll a pair of dice, and that's equally predictive of your future job income as your college GPA actually is. But they consign 99% to unhappiness, and the top 1%, when we study them, is actually not that happy either. The system is broken. It's based upon a flawed system of happiness and success, a formula for it, which is at the heart of my research. What I do is I study what I believe to be one of the fundamental problems that's causing us to limit both our happiness and success within organizations. And it's the formula we get there. And it's the way that we manage, and the way that we parent, and it's the way that we do self-development. Most people follow a formula, which is if you work harder, you're going to be more successful. As soon as you achieve these goals, think how happy you're going to be. Think how often we do that. As soon as I finish this project, then I'll be happier. As soon as I finish this presentation, then I'm going to feel happier. As soon as I finish all this travel, then I'll feel happier. As soon as I get into the right school, I'll feel happier. As soon as I get the right job, I'll feel happier. But what we notice is that formula, which undergirds most of our parenting styles and organizations, is scientifically broken and backwards for two reasons. The first reason is every time your brain has had a success in the past, what have you done? You've changed the goalpost of what success looked like almost immediately. You got good grades in school, don't get excited yet, you don't even have a job. You get a job, that's great, you have a job, but now you have to hit your sales target. Well, you hit your sales target, that's great, but we're going to raise your sales target for the next quarter, right? So, and each moment, we want to see sales rise, we want to see growth improve, we want to see grades improve. That's not the problem. The problem is where happiness lies in the formula for our managing our organizations and our first selves. What we found is if happiness is on the opposite side of success, you pushed it over the cognitive horizon. Your brain never quite gets there because it's a moving target. But flip around the formula. If you cause people to invest in their social support networks, deepen their social support networks, raise their levels of optimism, and change the way that they view stress from a threat to a challenge, it turns out every single business and educational outcome we know how to test for rises dramatically. We find that that productivity rises 31% when people move from a neutral state to a positive state. We find that sales rise by 37% cross industry. We found, similar to the research you found in the great book Give and Take by Adam Grant, we know that if you provide social support at work, you're 40% more likely to receive a promotion over the next 2-year period of time. We know that you live longer, your symptoms are less acute. We find that you stay at organizations even longer. All of that information is great, but the problem is that if you try to raise your levels of success rate for the rest of your life and you're successful at that, your happiness levels flatline. They don't move. Flip around the formula. If we find some way of investing in our engagement levels at work, if you've read Dan Pink's fabulous book, Drive, if you've been looking at ways to deepen social connection, if we can change the way we view stress, suddenly a different picture emerges. That's what I want to talk to you about, because what works really well in the laboratory sometimes doesn't work out in the messiness of life. So since I've spent my time at Harvard, I left in the middle of the banking crisis to try and figure out how we could apply this research out within the real world. And a lot of the work I'm going to talk about is at organizations, but I've also traveled to 51 countries working with farmers in Zimbabwe that lost their land, working with children at St. Jude Children's Hospital, trying to find out from some of the doctors there why it is that 4-year-old children with terminal cancer are more likely to tell their parents everything's going to be okay than the reverse. Why is there access to resilience in childhood that we lose sometimes in adulthood, and how do we import that to soldiers coming back from combat services? That's not what we're going to get to talk about today. What I wanted to talk about is some of the ways we've seen these organizations be able to thrive. We do 2 things. One of the things we do is, if you've read Charles Duhigg's fantastic book, The Power of Habit, you know how important habits can be. And over the past 7 years, what I've been doing is I've been looking to find out, are there habits that take less than 2 minutes a day that are akin to brushing your teeth, that if you did them for a period of 21 days in a row, that you could trump your genes and even up to 8 decades of experience. And that's exactly what we found. We found small little habits, something as simple as Martin Seligman found, where you write 3 things new that you're grateful for each day for 21 days in a row, can actually move people that were continually testing as pessimists at an organization to testing as low to moderate level optimists, and that the pattern exists for even 6 months. One of the things that I found that I love is if you write a 2-minute email praising or thanking one person you know, it turns out if you do that every day for a different person for 21 days. If you do it for the next 3 days, writing to somebody a 2-minute email praising them or thanking them, you're going to get fully addicted to it, because you're going to spend all day long thinking about how amazing you were for writing that email in the morning. And you get these great emails back because they don't know about the 2-minute rule, so they keep writing how great you are, and you're like, yep, all this is true. But 21 days later, when we ask you about your social connection, you realize you have incredibly deep social connection. The breadth, depth, and meaning in your social relationships has increased dramatically. We found that social connection is not only the greatest predictor of happiness within inside organizations, but we also found that social connection is as predictive of how long all of you will end up living as obesity, high blood pressure, or smoking. We sure fight hard against the negative, and we forget to tell people how powerful the positive can be. With my last minute, what I wanted to do is to tell you about what we're doing with organizations. We've seen these fantastic organizations take these ideas and run with them. In fact, Nationwide Insurance, for example, I'm working with the Nationwide Sales Academy, where when people are onboarded to become a sales leader there, they're taught that the new social script is when you come into the organization, it's not that once you hit your sales, then you're going to feel happier, but that happiness and optimism and social connection are exactly what's going to fuel the sales. So when we talk about this later on, it's not a surprise. That's what causes people to be successful here. One of the groups we were working with that's been led by Gary Baker actually went through one of the positive psychology training programs. We found, as I was talking to Larry from Gallup earlier this morning, we found that their Gallup scores actually improved dramatically in terms of their engagement with just a very short positive psychology intervention, but their revenues have moved from $350 million to $950 million over the past year, and that's actually, they think, going to happen again this coming year. We're finding at KPMG, we did a 3-hour intervention with them in December of 2008, right before the busiest tax season in history. 4 months later, during the busiest tax season in history, in April, we compared them to a control group that got a technical training, and what we found is exactly what Gallup found. Only 25% of your successes over the next 5 years are predicted based upon your intelligence and technical skills, which is how we hire, educate, and train. 75% of your successes will be based upon the belief that your behavior matters, your social connections, and the way that we perceive the stress that's coming in. And the final thing I wanted to mention is the work we were doing at UBS. Ali Akram and Peter Salovey from Yale University, Ali's now out at Stanford, and I went into UBS, and we found that most of the stress management programs that we put people through was actually causing people to get sicker. Because we tell people that if you go to a stress management program, as companies make you more stressed, we say, do you know stress is related to the 10 leading causes of death and disease in the United States? Did you know stress was found by the World Health Organization to be the #1 killer? Did you know that stress is catabolic? It tears down every organ in the human body. After that, what do you feel? Stress, you're like, stop emailing me so much, you're destroying every organ in my body, which I think would make a great away message while you're here. But what I think is fascinating is all that information's true, but there's equally true information that shows that stress, not good stress, I'm talking about high levels of negative stress, actually causes your immune system to turn on to its highest possible level, cognitive functioning to improve, memory to deepen. It turns out our social bonds deepen to its highest possible level, which is why when we go through, when the military onboards people, they don't put them through a beach vacation, they onboard them with boot camp. And that creates these meaningful narratives that people talk about for the entire rest of their career. What we did is we showed two-minute videos to these individuals in the middle of the banking crisis. Stress is enhancing, stress is debilitating. Here's how you fight it, here's how you embrace it. 6 weeks later, equal levels of stress. But the group that saw stress as a challenge instead of as a threat had a 23% drop in their health-related symptoms. Stress is inevitable, but its effects upon us are not. And I believe that all this research comes down to these three conclusions. Scientifically, happiness can be a choice. You don't have to just be your genes and your environment, and we can actually influence it. The second one is that happiness spreads. When we choose to do this, it actually cascades to other people, changing the social script. And finally, happiness is an advantage. In fact, what I would argue is that because it improves every single business and educational outcome we know, I believe that happiness, optimism, social connection are the greatest competitive advantages in the modern economy. And all it takes is taking this research that's only read on average by 7 people total and just bringing it to life.